here is exactly what he appears.
Nothing's the same anymore.
Commander Sinclair is being reassigned.
Why don't you eliminate the entire non-homeworld?
I see a great hand reaching out of the star.
You are.
President Clark has signed a decree today declaring
These
martial
orders
law.
have forced us to declare independence.
Let's let
people get off their encounter-suited butts and do something.
You are the one who was. To Zahadu who will die.
Why are you here? Do you have anything worth living for?
Think of my beautiful city of flames.
Giants in the playground.
Get the hell out of our galaxy!
We are here to place President Clark under arrest.
Well, welcome back to Continuum Meditations Discusses on this beautiful October evening, 2021. In this episode, let's talk about one of the most beloved and still perhaps underrated sci-fi shows of the 1990s, Babylon 5. As many who are fans of the series know by now, J. Michael Straczynski, Joseph Michael Straczynski, JMS to longtime B5ers, recently announced on Twitter that he is in fact rebooting the original Babylon 5 series, quote, from the ground up, unquote. This news has brought a mixture of excitement, cautious optimism, and, yes, from other quarters, outright rejection. I'd like to voice my thoughts on this development using two primary sources of info on the subject. The first, an article by Sean Hollister at TheVerge.com, and second, JMS's own words on the matter from a fresh tweet he posted just a week ago on September 27th. So, to begin, let's get to the meat of what this reboot is all about. From Sean Hollister's Verge article entitled The Beloved Babylon 5 is Getting Rebooted and series creator JMS is running the show, we read thusly. Now, mind you, this is actually a description that was given to The Verge by Warner Brothers, who was the original producer of the Babylon 5 series back in the 1990s. So we're getting a description here that really comes from the horse's mouth. They say, in a from-the-ground-up reboot of the original series, John Sheridan, an Earth Force officer with a mysterious background, is assigned to Babylon 5, a 5-mile-long space station in neutral space, a port of call for travelers, smugglers, corporate explorers, and alien diplomats at a time of uneasy peace and the constant threat of war. His arrival triggers a destiny beyond anything he could have imagined, as an exploratory Earth company accidentally triggers a conflict with the civilization a million years ahead of us, putting Sheridan and the rest of the B-5 crew in the line of fire as the last best hope for the survival of the human race. Now, Hollister himself goes on to say that's a pretty much dead-on description of the original show, minus some big surprises. Well, as those of you who were Babylon 5 fans from the beginning, like I, or perhaps those of you who may have caught up with the show at some point in the intervening 25 or whatever it is plus years now since the show was made, you know that that's, to quote Hollister, not just a pretty much dead-on description of the original show. It's bang on. I mean, it's like hit it with a hammer on the nail's head kind of description here. Bang on description, because minus, of course, some important caveats here. John Sheridan, as most of you know, was not the original Earth Force officer whom this program was supposed to revolve around. It was, in fact, originally Commander Jeffrey David Sinclair, as played by the late actor Michael O'Hare. May he rest in peace. And it was that mysterious background which is brought to bear in many parts of the storyline, from the Battle of the Line to his Commander Sinclair's interaction with the Minbari. I won't get into all of that because I don't want to spoil too much those of you who have never watched the program. But it was that mysterious background that originally was Jeffrey Sinclair's storyline to be told. And then getting into a conflict with the civilization a million years ahead of us. Well, that was, having to do all with the first ones and the Vorlons and the Shadows, as those of you who watch the show know. And that all changed after Michael O'Hare resigned from the show, and then Bruce Boxleitner was brought on later to play the character of Captain John J. Sheridan, and the storyline became his. Okay, so this is in fact a bang-on description of the show, with the exception that it looks like now what JMS is going to do is reboot this with John Sheridan being the primary nucleus of the show from the jump, from the very beginning, instead of someone who took over the storyline of Jeffrey Sinclair afterwards. All right, but let's go on, because JMS himself has some more justifications here, some more rationale as to what's behind this remake, this reboot, and I want to get into some of his own words on the subject, because I think that this is important to also to break down. In a series of tweets from September 27th, JMS, of course, both revealed that the rumors are true and why he's chosen to go forth with this project at this time. He says, to begin, to answer all the questions, yes, it's true. Babylon 5 is in active development as a series for the CW. We have some serious fans over at the network, and they're eager to see the show happen. I'm hip deep into writing the pilot now, and will be running the series upon pickup. So let's break this down a little bit. First of all, I'm gonna plead ignorance here, and I'm just gonna plead ignorance here. I don't know anything about the CW, okay, as a network. I don't know anything about the politics of the producers or the executives there. I don't know anything about the politics and ideology that is infused into any of the shows. I don't watch the shows. I don't watch the network. I know nothing about it except for the fact that it is partially owned by Warner Brothers. And so I have I point this out because I've actually seen some of you be very critical, highly critical of the CW for what you assert are its identity politics and its social justice warriorism stuff and all this business, right? And if these criticisms are true, and JMS decides to bend to them, then yes, we are going to have a problem here, readying itself to unfold right out of the gate. But here's the deal: on a more positive front, however, I think we can also talk about the fact that, first of all, JMS says he's going to be running the series upon pickup. So just as he did during the original show, I think this also has a positive side to it, because Warner Brothers, as I said before, partially owns the CW. And it was Warner Brothers who originally produced Babylon 5 for syndication back in the 90s. And so I think this invites brand loyalty from Warner Brothers to JMS, and it invites creative loyalty from JMS to Warner Brothers, because he knows it's going to give him a lot of leeway to play in his sandbox without them trying to interfere, or at least we hope that they will not interfere. I also think this is a positive because the CW is broadcast cable TV, and so this new B5 remake is not going to be hidden behind a streaming firewall. So this means for those of you who wish to see it without investing a big overhang, if you like it, you can keep watching and keep going with the program. And if you don't like it for whatever reasons, hey, you can drop it like a hot potato without losing much of your time, right? So there you are. So I think that this actually can be both positive, I suppose you could say, and negative from those standpoints, and perhaps even others. But let's go on with what JMS continues to say. He tells us that the network understands the uniqueness of Babylon 5 and is giving me a great deal of latitude with the storytelling. As noted in the announcement, this is a reboot from the ground up rather than a continuation for several reasons. Heraclitus wrote, "You cannot step in the same river twice, for the river has changed and you have changed." In the years since B5, I've done a ton of other TV shows and movies, adding an equal number of tools to my toolbox, all of which I can bring to bear on one singular question. If I were writing Babylon 5 today, for the first time, knowing what I know now as a writer, what would it look like? How would it use all the storytelling tools and technological resources available in 2021 that were not on hand then? So we see here that JMS quotes the pre-Socratic Greek philosopher Heraclitus when he's talking about the same river twice. JMS here is talking about the consistency of change, how he's changed, and how even those things that appear permanent are changing. Nothing remains the same, right? And so because of that, he tells us that a continuation is not very realistic. All right, well, okay, that's all well and fine, JMS. But here's my beef with this philosophizing, as it were, okay? We've already been here, folks. This reboot will emphasize the story of John Sheridan, which, as I previously pointed out with the Sean Hollister article from The Verge, is a bang-on description of the events from the first and second seasons of the original show, okay? And if we take this notion of continuation to mean going, not just rehashing the original, but going beyond the original, then we've already had Crusade, which was a one-season wonder of 13 episodes or something like that, and Legend of the Rangers, ill-fated though it was, and perhaps ill-loved as it was something that never even made it past the pilot. But whatever you think about either one of those shows, the point here is that continuations of the B5 universe have already been attempted. So this to me is not any kind of rationale for retreading ground we've already stepped on before. I think it's better to plant your flag in new ground, in unexplored territory, and this to me feels like a backward glance over the shoulder to reminisce on what was, right? But JMS goes on. He says, how can it be used, that this new B5 remake, how can it be used to reflect the world in which we live and the questions we are asking and confronting every day? Fans regularly point out how prescient the show was and is of our current world. It would be fun to take a shot at looking further down the road. So, B5, let's talk about that a little bit. And I think that he has a good point in saying this, how prescient the original show was. And I think it was brilliantly prescient. B5 was always a teaching tool on the human condition, as JMS himself has pointed out on more than one occasion. And as such, it took a realistic look at that human condition, both corporately and individually. And as such, it was not always idealistic or even optimistic about humanity, unlike, by contrast, some of its counterparts in Star Trek, especially the early iterations of that particular program, such as the original series and The Next Generation. But let it also be said, folks, that B5 was not unique in this regard either. Most science fiction since the Golden Era attempts to take a deep dive into human existence and to ask relevant questions about why we're here and where we're going, both as individuals and, of course, especially as a species. So to me, it's refreshing to know that JMS is going to continue the long sci-fi and B5 tradition of asking, what is man, that thou art mindful of him? Okay? But he goes further. He says, we will not be retelling the same story in the same way because of what Heraclitus said about the river. There would be no fun and no surprises. Well, yeah, I think most of us can agree with that. Better to go the way of Westworld or Battlestar Galactica, where you take the original elements that are evergreens and put them in a blender with a ton of new, challenging ideas to create something fresh yet familiar. All right, well, we've already discussed that. But he says further, to those asking why not just do a continuation for a network series like this, it can't be done because over half our cast are still stubbornly on the other side of the rim. He says, how do you do an original show about the original Londo without the original Veer, right? He asks, or Jakar. Or how do you tell Sheridan's story without Delenn? Or the story of B5 without Franklin, Garibaldi, or Zack? For those of you who don't know, this is a B5 in-universe reference here. Basically, B5 in a universe reference, the other side of the rim. I think it was actually used in the story as being, it was usually said as something like beyond the rim. Well, anyway, it's a reference to the unexplored portions of the galaxy. It's a reference to the unknown out there in the universe, and also a reference to those who have passed beyond the veil of death. Here, JMS is referring to a host of original cast members who have died in the real world in the intervening years between B5's ending and now. Some cast members that come to my mind are Richard Biggs, who, if I'm not mistaken, was the very first cast member to pass away in 2004. And if I recall correctly, he passed away before the age of 45 or right near the age of 45, one of the youngest cast members to die. And we've had a host of intervening cast members who have passed away in the intervening years, most recently with Mira Furlan, who died just this year in 2021. So this is what JMS is referring to when he's talking about our cast members who are stubbornly still beyond the rim. But when I read this statement, though, I don't know. Actually, to me, this reference further tells me why the backward glance is not the right move in doing a remake or a reboot or a rehash, whatever. Why it's in fact going in the wrong direction. As Captain Picard might say in that other great sci-fi storyline, our mission is to go forward. And I personally would love to see JMS expand his universe beyond what we've already understood as the foundations by taking us to new, unbroken ground. And as you said before, he's already tried this with Crusade, with Legend of the Rangers, ill-fated as those two may have been. So I don't know about why we're going to get new actors to play these characters or some characters based upon them, etc., etc., etc. Well, all that being said, here's my bottom line. I suggest careful enthusiasm here. I am not diametrically opposed to this project, but the recent past history of sci-fi reboots bids me indulge cautiously. And as I previously warned in my video on the revival of Jean-Luc Picard, if this Babylon 5 reboot, rehash, remake, again, whatever you want to call it, turns out poorly, then we need to examine our hearts to determine if we intend to keep allegiance with it simply for the sake of honoring the past. I, like many of you, especially those of you who, like me, were there from The Gathering onward, I, like you, do not wish to see one of the greatest sci-fi series of all time reduced to ashes on the pyres of the Hollywood elite and their alternate agendas. Okay? Nor do I wish to see this program destroyed because JMS just does not bring the creative wellspring to it that perhaps he did in fact bring to the original, and in trying again is trying to strike lightning, trying to make lightning strike twice and fails. Sometimes, to me, folks, it's best to leave well enough alone. And Babylon 5 was not simply well enough, it was brilliant. Yes, it had some missteps. It had a number of missteps, especially in those last seasons between 4 and 5. Personally, there were storylines that I did not really care for that were ongoing, like this telepath stuff. I think they could have just dropped that altogether. But leave that aside. Babylon 5, to me, was brilliant from beginning to end because of the overall understanding that it brought to the science fiction table. It had depth, it had meaning, it had a lot of prescience to it that I don't think I see in a lot of modern sci-fi, and I think that that's something that a lot of older writers bring to the table that a lot of newer writers today just don't seem to get because they're not as well grounded and rooted. But anyway, if that means letting Babylon 5 rest, letting it sleep in light, as it were, then so be it. So those are my thoughts on the matter. As always, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments section. If you wish to share this video with others, then please feel free to do so, whether you agree or disagree with me or somewhere in between. As always, you feel free to express yourselves accordingly. So, until next time, science fiction and Babylon 5 fans, continue forward and press on toward the upward reach of mankind.